It's funny how the more I play this game, the more characters I find that have the deal with it glasses. At first I thought it was just Cleveland and Prinz that I noticed that had it, but at this point there's a good number of Vanguard members that wear them every now and then. I mean, we've got Deutschland, Colin Retrofit, Admiral Hipper, Wichita, Washington. Wait, Washington? What? You're not Vanguard Washington? What are you trying to do the how do you do fellow kids meme? Alright, well, I mean, I'll give it to you that you did it well, but hey, you know what? I got another meme for you that just might work as well. For today, we're moving on to another battleship. This time, we're covering Uss Washington. Washington joins us from the event Fallen Wings alongside many other ships as well. As of the time of this video's release, I believe that this event would be the next one to have its own rerun, since the previous event, Visitors Died in Red, has already had its own rerun. So I don't believe it'll be too long if you've missed it. Being an SR battleship, does she hold her rarity well, or is she just not the best ship in the backline? Well, let's take a look at her overall and see what makes her stand out. Stat-wise, we'll look at her survival stats first. Now her health is about average when compared to most SR battleships, so our glorious German engineering won't lose to Washington here. Washington does have heavy armor, making AP rounds her biggest weakness and allowing her to be somewhat tanky as a backliner with that health pool she has. However, one thing that is definitely worth pointing out is her really high anti-air stat. Now this is something that I have noticed to be average among SR Eagle battleships. However, when compared to other factions, Washington will take significantly less damage from air-based attacks than other battleships from other factions. She does pay for this a little bit with evasion, as she and several other USS ships suffer from a lower than average evasion. So she's more than likely to be hit than her allies, even though that their evasion was already low to begin with. On the offensive side of things, her firepower is about average when compared to her SR counterparts. Her reload is a bit better than average, so she'll be able to shoot a bit faster than most of her allies. Now in terms of her loadout and efficiencies, Washington's main gun efficiency is a tad bit lower than the average at 130%. Her secondary gun is limited to a DD gun with an efficiency of 200%. Now this would be par the course if she wasn't limited to DD guns. Having DD guns instead of CL guns can make it harder for a ship to fully defend themselves when a ship manages to break your front line. DD guns may shoot faster, but they do not hit as hard. Thankfully, this is made up a little bit by her second limit break, which grants her 2 additional secondary gun mounts, which allows her the ability to fire more shots at close range threats. Lastly, her anti-air gun is at an average efficiency when compared to most SR battleships. Now on first glance, she doesn't seem to be of a particularly unique ship. A lot of the USS battleships have a stat line that is very similar to Washington's. At level 120, her stat line doesn't boost too hard, but she does get a substantial boost to her health, which does allow her to be quite a tanky character for sure. Now, aside from this health boost, her stat line doesn't really make her stand out against several other ships we've covered already. However, skills can make or break a character, so let's see if Washington's 2 skills can make up for that. Washington's first skill is Courageous Shelling, which grants Washington up to a 70% chance to fire a special barrage every 20 seconds. This barrage is a combination of various shells from both of her gun types. The overall damage is based on the skills level as well as her firepower stat. From my time using her and having the skill proc, this barrage is actually pretty good at cleaning up mobs that are just out and about on screen. The widespread pattern of this barrage allows her to hit a lot of targets provided that she's in the flagship spot of your fleet. Now just remember that this is an RNG skill with the same proc chance as good old... Look, I know we're oath, but can you please get out of the video? This isn't yours. Her second skill, Knight of Iron Bottom Sound, is an interesting one. This skill gives her some direct synergy with South Dakota, one of the SR ships you receive for grinding points in PvP. Now this skill activates when South Dakota's health drops below 30%. When this happens, Washington will increase her own damage output by up to 20% and will absorb 30% of the damage that South Dakota takes. This damage absorption is trumped if South Dakota has her skill, the Strongest Shield, active. For the first 5 seconds of this skill's activation, South Dakota will ignore damage that would sink her, but can still take damage if it is not lethal. However, it will only be 70% of its actual damage value. This skill will only occur once per battle. Now, this skill is also a particularly interesting one as it allows South Dakota to become an even tankier character. but we'll get to South Dakota in her own video. In all honesty, I haven't had this perk activate in PvE at all, as my fleets are generally strong enough that it isn't much of a concern. Now, I wouldn't expect this perk to activate in PvE unless your fleet is either poorly designed or you're trying out another mode above auto called AFK. However, this skill is the reason the PvP fleet named WASD exists. The increased damage output and allowing South Dakota to stay alive a lot longer isn't bad in a PvP match. I have seen this pair usually with Enterprise and it does pretty well. But if you're looking for my serious PvP advice, while this fleet isn't exactly bad, there are several better alternatives. Now, her skills are somewhat interesting and they do make her stand out a bit. The synergy with South Dakota is strange, but the PvP world seems to still use it quite often. She's not a bad character to use, but if we were to compare her to the other 3 battleships we've covered so far, then I'd say she's in last place at this time. Warspite, Bismarck, and Tirpitz all have their own unique ways of fighting, and are just a tad bit better at what they do. The next question we have for her is mob or boss fleet backline. Washington can handle a boss fight, but she's done better with my mob fleets as of late. Her barrage can do damage to the boss, but the spread it has, especially if she's in the flagship spot, will be a lot more effective against multiple targets rather than just one. Her DD gun also doesn't make for the best defensive line if there is a decent threat of suicide ships in the boss fight. Her synergy skill will help keep one ship alive at the cost of Washington herself taking more damage. This is something that can be risky if you bring both of them together in a boss fight. It's really good for a ship to take additional damage from attacks, especially one that benefits in the flagship spot. Now, Washington is best as a flagship character due to that barrage of hers having a pretty good spread. It'll be better to avoid pairing South Dakota with Washington for a boss fleet due to the increased risk of her sinking from mid-fight if South Dakota's health falls too low. If Washington sinks while she's your flagship, well, that's game over for that fleet. So consider that risk when sorting the two of them together. You can have an easier time with this risk on mob fleets as your Vanguard could help take out suicide ships more effectively, or you could pair them with a Kashi to heal the whole fleet constantly. Outside of her skill, she has no major synergies with other ships, and can be easily integrated with other fleets. Well, except for backliners with good frontal barrages that would also require the flagship position. Overall, Washington is not a bad ship to have in your backline. Her barrage is good and can help in a pinch. However, as mentioned before, there are ships that can easily accomplish this and much more. Her synergy can be of significant use in PvP as the boost to her damage output can be quite a scary thing for opposing teams' fleets. Thanks to her AA stat, she can be of considerable use if you're in a world that puts you under constant threat of air assaults. Just remember that while she can defend herself, the GD gun might not be able to take out targets as quickly as a CL gun. If you would like a few more options before your PvP setups, then Washington can be worth the leveling. Just remember that you could have to get South Dakota first, if you want to experience the synergy that she has. Outside of PvP, she can be a good character for mob fleets, so she'll make a good substitution if your main mob fleets are dealing with morale issues. Lastly, you might want to teach her how to smile. She's bad at it. And that'll be all for Washington. Hope you guys enjoyed this and that it will help you in your future sorties. The list for the future ships to cover is shown on screen now. Now, I also know that I can no longer fit them all on the screen, so I have a Google Doc of the list built and can be publicly viewed. The link is in the description below. If there is a ship girl that you do not see on the list and I have not covered, then let me know in the comments below. I also have a playlist for the series and you can check that out in the description as well. Next up is Minneapolis, so look forward to her video when it comes out, whether you are a regular viewer or a patron supporting the channel on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next livestream or video that I do. Until then, I'll see you all real soon.